Showcasing commitment, perseverance, and steadfast dedication. This medal stands as an emblem of this unwavering spirit, echoing parallels with the journey of the Good Fellows Initiative. It is my honor to announce the presentation of the India Service Medal of 1939 to 1945 to Uche Orji by our chairman, Lakshmi.
Uche Orji, former Managing Director and Chief Executive Officer of the Nigerian Sovereign Investment Authority, NSIA, it's alternatively a Nigerian Sovereign Wealth Fund, served on the boards of the Infrastructure Credit Guarantee Company, Infra Credit, as a Chairman and Non-Executive Director at the National Bank of Nigeria, was a Managing Director and the Global Coordinator of Semiconductor Equities Research, JP Morgan Securities London, co-manager of Global Technology Fund and Pan-European Equities Fund. It's an absolute pleasure and privilege to introduce Mr. Uche Orji today in the Good Talks.
Thank you.
How are you?
Very well, overwhelmed by the venue. It's beautiful. And quite frankly, grateful to be part of an illustrious company of people that have been so impressive through the course of this event. Thank you.
Your childhood journey, it's an inspiring one. I think you should share. It's a time for you to say your childhood journey in the front of this audience.
Thank you. Where do I start? So I was born in Nigeria. I was born in a part of Nigeria, the eastern part of Nigeria, at the end of what was probably the most violent conflict that ever had been in Africa. It was the Nigeria-Biafra War. My parents were on the Biafra side. And this was a conflict that cost 3 million lives, mostly children. And I was born just as the war ended. And so growing up, all around me, what I saw were broken men, but many of them were very proud men, and who quickly rebuilt, and within 10 years had become, by income per head, one of the highest groups in Nigeria. Nigeria is a very diverse country. And in some ways that shaped me. It shaped me through my high school. I went to boarding school in Nigeria, and then through university. Watching the country heal after what was a very long conflict, and watching my group get back reintegrated into the country was very inspiring in terms of how to coexist with other people. But what was also more important had been the role of particular individuals in helping shape the journey. And the journey that took me from Nigeria to Boston to go to business school at HBS, to Goldman Sachs, where I was running money at Goldman, to JP Morgan, both of them in London, and then to UBS. And I think the UBS was quite an interesting experience. That was in New York. And then going from UBS to go back to Nigeria after having been away for more than almost 20 years, to go and run and set up the Nigeria Sovereign Investment Authority was particularly fascinating. But there were 3 or 4 points, I think, in my childhood journey I'd like to point out. I think the first was the role of people who mentored my career, from immediate family to friends and people who took a particular interest in guiding my career and forcing me to make certain decisions I wouldn't have made. From being guided to study chemical engineering to being guided into my career in financial services. There are a couple of people that I thought were very particularly important. The second was my family, my parents in particular. My culture is a tough love culture, but at the same time, these men were unbending in their will in terms of how they guided me through. It was only in hindsight I realized how economically challenged my family was, because my father made sure we never felt that. Made big sacrifices in bringing all these kids through top universities, and for that we're very, very grateful. The third and perhaps the most important in terms of shaping my career was my high school. And I tend not to talk too much about it, but the high school was particularly important in character shaping, because I went to high school when I was 10 years old, and it was a boarding school. And people beat the crap out of you, but at the end of the day, most of those things end up toughening you up. And I think in some ways that helped me in some ways to become able to face adversity as I grew up, and I faced multiple challenges across multiple cultures.
90% of the people, once they leave the country and they go through the career you had and went to some of the best schools in the world, and you have seen the best part of your financial world, they don't go back to Nigeria. In a way, I say, because it's at that time still an underdeveloping country. What made you to do that, and how was your family reaction? What was an inspiration for you to do that?
Yes. No, thank you very much for that question. I think in terms of what inspired me to decide to go back to Nigeria was the Nigerian government had decided to create a sovereign wealth fund, which I personally at the time, and I think many people didn't take very seriously, because Nigeria has a reputation for not doing things the right way, especially for graft and things just being done poorly. And I remember a conversation I was having with my wife when I was invited by the headhunter to interview for this job. And I said to my wife, we can live in New York. And at the time we're living in New York, and we had a decent life in New York City. I was with UBS then, and I was quite senior within UBS. But I said to my wife, we can live in New York and join the crowd in complaining about Nigeria and why things didn't work well. But we have an opportunity to go back and help fix these things. And if we don't, we will abdicate every right to complain in the future. And that for me was a very major turning point in terms of deciding to go back to Nigeria. That was a tough discussion with the family. Our kids were young, and my wife wasn't sure that we should be raising them in Nigeria. So what that meant was I had to make a lot of the commute back and forth. So almost every other weekend I was on a plane back to New York in the first year, then moved them back to London, which is where we're leaving for, moved to New York. It was a tough decision on the family. But I said to myself, look, people built these cities. People built these organizations that we come to admire. I was going to make the sacrifice. Initially, I thought I'll just do it for 5 years. But I set out with one objective, to build a truly world-class organization and show the world that we can actually run organizations that I think will compete with the very best in the world. And this was the objective I had with NSI, and hope that could be just one light beacon. And the second thing I also saw was, these markets are emerging markets, because in the financial infrastructure of these markets, there are many holes and many gaps. And so some of those gaps were important to be fixed. And there were many organizations we had to build. You mentioned infra credit. So one of the things we did in NSIA was to invest in infrastructure. But to do that, you needed to create a bond market. To get a bond market, you need to create a guarantee structure to get pension funds in. These things didn't exist. We built those things from scratch, and many other institutions. And so for me, I saw an opportunity to actually build truly world-class institutions to help fill the gaps that I saw in the financial markets. So that was that was the idea, but you have to bring that idea home and explain that to your wife, who at the time was saddled with 3 children under the age of 10, 3 boys, and by herself, living in New York City. It was a tough conversation, and I'm really grateful for the fact that I got the support to do this work. It wasn't easy, but in hindsight, I think, we'll probably not have done it any other way. We're very happy for how it all turned out.
So do you think the award should be given to your wife, the good fellow award,
yes,
not to you?
Yes, she deserves it more than I do. She's the real good fellow.
Behind every successful man, there's a woman, right? And for you, your wife is a big support.
Thank you.
You are blessed.
Thank you, sir.
The NSIA has created more than 250,000 direct jobs.
Yes.
That's and then more than their assets has grown on $1 trillion, 1 trillion naira, Nigerian naira. What are the factors you think plays a critical role in building the country of Nigeria or in Africa as a continent to emerge? And what would be the role of Nigeria in the whole African continent emerging out?
It's a very good question. Now let's talk about Nigeria for a minute. I think that Nigeria is perhaps, and we've been saying this for the last 10 years, but I think it's more real now than it was 10 years ago. It is at a tipping point in terms of what it becomes. First, there's a whole demographic that's very different. You've got a country of 200 million people, yes, nothing compared to India, but you have 100 million of those under the age of 19, which I think is very, very important. Half the population under the age of 19. They're digital natives, they're being trained in the same way. And when I look at Nigeria in terms of the evolution, education-wise and skills-wise, it reminds me of India when I used to go to India back in the 90s. And a lot of these skills are being built, and I think we're going to get to a point where you're going to start to see, with the presence of new infrastructure and technology, a lot of outsourcing starting to happen in Nigeria. So I think that that is the first thing that makes it very, very optimistic for me, is the fact that I think we're starting to see the skill sets coming. The second thing, and this is the role I hope to have played under the NSIA, was to actually help in organizing the public finances through the creation of institutions like the Sovereign Wealth Fund, the Development Bank of Nigeria, so that we can organize a financial structure that supports the skill sets. The third thing was actually to get the industries to work. So under the NSIA, I invested in infrastructure a lot. Not enough, but I wish we could do more. And I'm hoping that the consistently political government after government can make those investments. But 10, 15, 20 years from now, I believe you'll be looking at a totally different country and consequently a totally different continent. The role of Nigeria in Africa cannot be overemphasized. It is what, 25% of the 20% of the continent's population is Nigeria, densely populated, highly opinionated people. You see them everywhere now, in the United States in sports, in academia, in medicine. You're starting to see them in technology. So I think gradually you're starting to see a country that will eventually break through. Currently, it's still very challenged, but I'm very, very optimistic about what could be the opportunities for the country.
Ladies and gentlemen, let's applaud the wonderful Mr. Uche Orji. Thank you, sir, for sharing your wisdom and knowledge. It has been a great pleasure to have you on the Good Talks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.